So, welcome to my podcast. And I'm having a hard time deciding on the name. Can I confess that? I had it as a story alchemist, but I'm not convinced that's really the name. So, we're just going to call it our podcast for the day. And this is really a place where we explore story as this extraordinary tool for giving us access to the center of our humanity and guiding us through living through wild times. And so it is my delight and my great pleasure to get to be in the presence of the extraordinary Jacqueline today. And we're going to talk about some wonderful things that could be they're going to trigger all kinds of memories for you. We're going to talk about fairy tales, and we're going to talk about, working with story as a tool to really explore your consciousness. We're going to talk about, shamanic, what is this thing that we call shamanic, and it's really an opportunity for all of us to be here together and to explore, what is this wild thing? Jacqueline, I always like to begin with a really simple way of like a miracle moment. And can you share like one of your miracle moments with us? Because it's like, and what is a miracle moment? It's like one of those moments when like the universe collaborates or organizes or aligns and like something completely unexpected or the miraculous arrives. And I'm just curious if you have one of those stories in you. Oh, we can't hear you for some reason because you were muted. I'm sorry about that.
Muted. There we go. Oh, it's just beautiful to be here with you, Leah, and everybody who's joining in. This is not the story that I was going to mention because Leah actually asked me this question beforehand, but what's actually coming to mind is a story when I realized that the impossible is really simple and that the impossible can actually happen in the moment. And I was sitting under a birch tree getting ready to run a retreat in a beautiful setting. And just beyond the birch tree that I was leaning against on this clear summer's day, blue sky, not a hint of wind anywhere, not a breeze, not a ripple on the leaves. And I saw coming down from a leaf a spider, just one of those hanging on a tiny thread, and it dropped down near me. And I was watching it, and it wasn't swaying because there was no breeze. And then all of a sudden it went up and it went down a few times, and then it started swinging. And there was still no breeze, but it was swinging. I'm thinking, wow, it's generated its own momentum. How amazing. And then I realized that it had actually moved out from the tree, that it was no longer attached to a twig or a leaf, but I could still see its thread. And I followed it. And I realized that the spider was actually moving, propelled by something, and that its thread was attached to something. And I didn't know what. And I followed it all the way down a path, all the way past the hedge, all the way down into the back part of the bottom garden. And I realized that spiders could fly. And I had no idea how. And I realized that your web is always attached to something. It's just invisible and it's mysterious and it's wondrous. And something in me in that moment opened to nature doesn't say anything is impossible, that all I need to do is just shift the kaleidoscope of my perception and I can see in wonder and what else might I or others be capable of. If spiders can fly all by themselves, then who knows what else might happen.
I love that. You know, I walked out my house the other night and there was I'm cool with spiders, but there's this one kind of spider that I'm not that cool with because it's like they're, I mean, I'm talking to you, you're in Australia. You guys probably have spiders this big. Here in California, when we see a spider this big, we're like, ooh. But this guy is like, he's like an army guy and this spider, and he's built himself like a mega mansion in front of our front door. Two webs this size right next to each other. I'm like, dude, you are not going hungry. I'm so proud of you. But I so appreciate you speaking to that miracle and those miracles that like are in plain sight if we can see them. I'm so excited to formally introduce you to Jacqui Bushel. And she guides people in awakening their creative soul essence through connecting with the mysteries of earth, story, and their own sacred nature. Jacqui bridges a broad range of skills from plant spirit alchemy, energetic healing, history and mythic philosophy, embodiment practices, and journey work to inspire transformational shifts in the way people see themselves and their world. She weaves together folklore, story medicine, and our natural environment in empowering ways to help us connect more harmoniously with Earth, each other, and the earth. I don't know why I want to say earth that many times in your bio. And Jacqui has been dancing with a mythic imagination for most of her life. She, through her love of wisdom held in fairy tales and her work as a spiritual herbalist, listening for voices and stories of the land. As a writer and speaker, she is passionate about encouraging others to explore their own mythology with the borderlands of psyche, body, culture, and landscape. She has been facilitating women's circles, ceremonies, retreats, workshops, and courses in Australia and internationally for 30 years. As a senior lecturer, keynote, and consultant, she has taught herbal medicine, essences, and intuitive healing in colleges and community centers. Her work is always empowering and experiential, inviting you to come home to a deeper sense of belonging and kinship with nature. And I feel like my part of my experience of being with you, Jacqui, is like, and getting to witness the people who've gone through your courses. Like, I really feel like you bring people into their own true nature. And every time I'm with you, something in me, like my cells, you know, in California, my cells are like, and when I get to be in your presence and I get to feel your rooted connectedness to earth and your commitment and clarity around story, something in my roots stills a little bit. And so I so appreciate being in your resonance. And I'm really excited to like get to play with you today. So Jacqui, we get to talk about things I've never gotten to hear about. Like, what is your creation story? Like, how on earth did we get here? Like, how did you find yourself, you know, playing with plants as a livelihood, you know, ceremony? You know, how did you become a devotee to folklore and, you know, but what did little Jacqui do to get to be this, to be like this?
When I was little, I didn't cope so well with the outside world. I was one of those really awkward, nerdy, didn't really understand social engagement skills as a child. So I spent a lot of time up in a giant peppercorn tree with a lot of books, like all day, most days, whenever I could, and reading. And I realized looking back that everything that I was reading had a mythic component to it. There were always talking creatures and beings. There was a touch of magic. And I know my greatest yearning was remember what I couldn't remember, and that what I knew was true. I think my greatest grief as a little one was that I couldn't fly. So there was this sense of loss that I had, that I was trying to regain through reading books of enchantment and mystery and wonder and soul as this precocious, awkward, strange little child. And one of the key things that happened when I was about 20, and I was becoming a very, very righteous environmental activist, and I had, you know, all the right clothes and the right dreadlocks and all the right friends. And I went out to an environmental camp. It was at a very righteous stage in my life, and I was just about to study naturopathy, and I was going to become a healer and save the world. And I went off to the environmental camp, which was in the middle of the boondocks and in country Victoria. It was hard to find. And I went there with my group of friends, and we're sitting down on the Friday night, we're gathering and we're talking and eating. And when suddenly the door flew open, and in stalks a woman And I say stalks because she just walked in, and she was tall, and to my eyes she was old. She had this long sort of gray hennaed hair and wrinkles, and she walked in with this level of pride that I'd never seen before in a woman. And she said, "I am a woman warrior, and I'm here to teach you." And I think my eyes just about fell out of my head, and something in me just went, oh, with yearning and with longing. And her story was she'd been living in a cave outside of Adelaide for 5 years, talking to whales, and she got a message that there was a women's camp on, so she followed her guides to the middle of Victoria, the next state over, and found us. And I was just reeling. I mean, I'd grown up in a town that didn't even have zucchinis. They were too modern for my town. I mean, it was a small town that I grew up in. It was my first year in the city, and she blew everything sky wide. I mean, what do you mean talking to whales and caves, and where would you go to the loo? I was kind of practical. And what do you mean guides? How did you find us? And I knew with every part of my being that I wanted that this was something that I'd yearned for in my whole being. And then everything changed after meeting her. There was a fire in me that I was able to put a name on. And it involved spirit and communion and dancing with nature and things that I didn't really know, but that was it. So that was probably the key shaping, really, of my life. I don't even know her name. She was the warrior woman.
I love that. I love that these people that walk into our lives and like sometimes they push us into a path, or sometimes they nudge us, or they weave us in, and if we're open to really receiving the gift of them, something can really happen. And I feel
Yes.
like, I think about my life, and I think about certain times when doors have opened and closed, windows have opened and closed. Some of them we go through, some of them we pass. And I don't know why you're evoking this story, but I was living in Richmond, Virginia, and I just, gone through graduate school, and everything looked right. Like I was living in a great house. I had a great housemate. I had a good job. Like everything was good, but my soul would not settle. Like something was just like it would not settle in. And I was sitting at the gas station, and I was leaning against my car, putting gas in, really trying to figure out the rest of my life. I was sitting there trying to figure out the rest of my life. And this truck driver walked up to me and he's like, "Lady, I don't know what you're trying to do, but you're not going to do it like that."
Isn't that just straight from the gods? Yes.
And it kind of liberated me. It's like, maybe you should trust in the universe a little bit more, and not try to think that you're the one in charge. And I love that.
Oh, isn't there always such a dance of reciprocity when we allow that to speak to us? Oh, it's like stories in their own aliveness, or people that come in and say those words that open something. And it gets me curious as well. How is it that we say yes to some things and not to others? Or what is it that allows that kaleidoscopic shift? I'm curious about that sort of edge, how we navigate those thresholds. Or
Such a
yeah.
great question. And it's I just heard something. You only get answers to the questions that you ask. And then there's, of course, the idea that we don't want to try to answer them, because then we destroy the question. But I really I love that question, right? Like, what determines, what gives us access to the life force that can say yes, or chooses to say no? Or is there discernment, or is there fear that's driving the passing by? Or so many things that can bring us to the question, to the threshold. And I think one of the things I really want to explore with you today is this difference between myth and a fairy tale.
Mm.
And I feel like I am Kindred, the land of myth. It is a place that I feel uh, at ease being in communion with. And one of my favorite expressions that comes from it, that describes a myth, is from Sean King, who says that a myth is the earth speaking out loud. And,
Oh,
and
isn't
then,
that just so rich?
isn't
Just to let
it?
that
And
land and the implications of that.
well,
Yeah.
and like, what does that bring us to? And it brings us to the threshold of, oh, to be in relationship to story, to myths, is to be in relationship to earth. And so
Yes.
when we think about urban myths and or the myths that we tell about our lives, or even like how we speak about climate change, like how we shape and form our stories, all of them are in consequence to how we are or aren't in relationship to earth. Like that the source of that very connection informs how we tell stories. And and then I also really appreciate this other, piece from Martin Shaw, who says, who's just, shared, I think it's not necessarily from him, but, he shares this very commonly understood piece that a myth, a formal myth has no author. So it's somehow this magical creature which has escaped the one law on this earth that everyone else has to participate in, which is entropy, right? And somehow it has gone and passed from one life and one generation to another, to another, to another, to another, to another. It continues to live, and nobody even knows who its creator was, who spoke it into existence. But it's so strong, the life force is so strong that it walks as a wild creature among us. And like I feel like myths, they play our instrument. If our instrument, like, it gets to come into us, and you'll tell a myth a certain way and I'll tell a myth another way, and each of them, like, our instruments get played based on like what we're able to bring to the story. And I love them. And I feel like you are very entrenched in myths, but also fairy tales. And so I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit about the distinction, the difference, like, between the myth and a fairy tale.
Oh, there's so many glorious golden threads in what you've just spoken to there that we could tease out for ages. Every part of my being's going, yes, there's this. Um, it's like it's like we've forgotten. I'll just come back to a definition in a moment, but it's kind of like we've forgotten how to speak myth. It's like we've forgotten the languages of nature. We're speaking literal rationalism. I recently I was sharing a story. It's actually a Martin Shaw one about the woman who became a fox. And one of the participants said to me, but how could, when you step on the ground, how could a star form? And I thought, oh, we don't speak poetry anymore. There's how do we, as a culture, as a collective of disconnection and disembodied and disengagement and of othering and creating stories and myths uh, about beings that are something less than, or oh, those stories. How do we actually overcome this, and how do we actually re-engage with a language that's not literal? There's this great quote that I heard the other day on a podcast, that if we bring fantasy into the literal, it's a mutilation, that they speak totally different languages and that we shouldn't bring them together. That if you make myth literal, then it sinks it into a 3D realm that is static, that it always needs to live in this ever-flowing river of imaginal realms of movement. And for me, coming back to that definition, for me, I've got a really simple one. I love what both Martin and Sean Kane say. For me, myth, as opposed to fairy tales, myths root us in the divine. They gift us with the wholeness of our own divinity. They gift us with a sense of where our bones lie, where we come from, and our a greater collective relationship with the world, with the land, and with place. They're often very specific to place. And fairy tales, they're much more personal. They don't necessarily root us in divinity, though you can chase a little thread and climb up a golden ladder to reach divinity through fairy tales, because they're portals as well. I really believe that both fairy tales and myths are alchemical portals of initiation, of transformation. And fairy tales, they root us down in the land. They take us into the well, and they take us down into a more of a chthonic kind of earth-based place. And I feel that fairy tales as well they're very relational. They bring us into relationship with soul, with our own personal storied journey. And they gift us with, actually, so do myths, gift us with archetypal awareness and archetypal richness. They gift us with symbols and metaphors. And what they also both do is that they gift us with a language that is able to hold polarity. God, isn't that a gift for these times where it's I'm right, or no, I'm right, and I'm righter, no, I'm righter, and okay, if we want to find a truth, sometimes what we do in our culture is, well, let's find the middle path. Let's find the way between these opposites, and that'll be the right thing. Let's find a third choice. And fairy tales and myths say, forget that, sweet cakes. Here's this. Wolf is predator and dangerous, and wolf is the great mother. Wolf is the instigator of immense change and knowing and coming into the wild, who will nourish you and nurture you, and both are true at the same time. It's up to you how you navigate it and what kaleidoscopic filter you have on at the time. So one of the stories that I have, that I carry and that I've loathed carrying as well, is Red Riding Hood. And it teaches very much about the relationship with wolf and with the wild. And I loathed it so much, because one of the things that also happen with myths and with fairy tales, maybe more so with fairy tales, is that they get rewritten in every culture that they touch, which is rich and glorious, but it's also very political. They get narrowed down into like what Charles Perrault and the Grimm brothers did. They grimmified them. They turned them into Christian moralizing, simple stories. They've still got archetypal wonders in them that you can find in the bones of their story, in bones of their being. But I'm thinking about people's need to find their one true story, the origin of fairy tales. And that's an absolute misnomer. I think it's part of our culture of finding the right answer, of having control, of finding the one true thing. And fairy tales all of them are true, but at different times and places. And what we're doing now is we're rewriting fairy tales to make them relevant and appropriate here and now for us.
And I
We're
think that,
changing the dynamics. Yeah.
oh my gosh, there's so much
Yes.
that you just said that I'm just like, oh
Oh.
my God, how do we do all these things
Yes.
together?
Mm.
This piece that, right, like, I talk a lot about what it is to be a sacred storyteller, and to me, sacred storytelling means I'm telling stories in service of life. That's this is a clear intention. Keep life going. I'm not going to tell stories that are going to be destructive, that are going to plant images of destruction. I'm not going to tell stories that are going to separate, but this idea of like these stories that they give us this greater capacity, yin yang. It's one of the most ancient symbols. I don't think it's going anywhere. And it talks about the presence of light and dark together in union, create the whole. And I feel like as storytellers, we get to bring people into that and remind people at a time when there's so much of this or that, or right or wrong, and it's like, right, no, it's like all of us together. How do we live in peaceful conflict? How do we live in union? How can we live, and be different among each other? And it's like this greater thing. And as storytellers, we have the privilege of knowing how possible it is. Like we live it inside of us when we get to tell these old stories that holds all these old wisdom in it. And,
Yes.
you were speaking about story as portals, and first, actually, I'm sorry, before I even go up there, I want to speak to this other thing that you said, which I just love, that stories actually come from different places in the universe. We're talking a story, this mythic that brings us into the divine of the soul. We're talking about this ethereal being, and then you're talking about fairy tales, which are very earth-based, and not that it's this or that, right? It's not this or that, but like to really like, to understand that like, right, these stories, they come in service of different things.
Yes.
And they have different resonances in them, and they're here to do and be and walk with among us. Like an apple is an apple and an orange is an orange. They taste different, and
Yes.
so
It's
much. But
it is. There's also, I think at these times, we need new tools. Oh, well, we actually need old new tools. It's like we've lost story as a tool of consciousness, a tool of shape-shifting consciousness. And we need to relearn those languages which are sensory and feeling, and engage with them in an oral way, in a spoken way, so that we can listen with different types of ears than when we're reading something and skimming over for cue points. Or I don't like that, or it's not relevant. But we're actually hearing something, and when it's spoken, it's medicine. It resonates through your body in an entirely different way, and they offer us the ability, I believe, to be able to navigate these times, because they bring us, like the spider did, into the realm of impossibility. I don't know what any of the answers might be to the various crises that we're facing, but I sure as hell know that the earth has got some answers, and those trees might have answers, and the other world, and the 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 imagination of the earth, in the imagination, the sacred imagination of the collective, will have things that I could never dream of by myself. So it brings us into community in a different way, and enables us to access that level of visionary dreaming. And here we are coming into Pluto's in Aquarius now, which is sort of coming from the polarity of Pisces into the community visionary dreamer, the one who is able to bring the prayers into life. And in some ways, I feel story is a way of bringing prayer to life, because it can speak to us on so many levels, and it's in a way neutral. People will feel it in themselves and respond in a different way than if I say, here's a fact, this is what's happening, blah, blah, and people will yes or no or dispute around it. One of the things I've really found in workshops over the last few decades is that people often have no recollection of what the retreat was or the workshop or what they learned, but they remember the feel of it. They remember, oh, that was so loving. And my God, that story that you told about this, I've never, ever forgotten what that fox did, or what Mr. Buffhead said. I remember Mr. Buffhead's story. they remember the stories and the feeling and the state. And I figure if that can land, that can shift. There's a transmission that occurs that doesn't happen in facts, because we access different parts of the brain and story. Yeah, we know this. You say to people, let me tell you a story about this. And you feel the whole room go, oh, yeah. And they relax and they listen with their bodies.
Even
And
as you just said that, like the cells even in my arms got activated. And it's like, it's one of my favorite moments as a storyteller, when I just start with Once Upon a Time. And it's something that happens where everyone just goes, and it's like some part of our most ancient self that knows about this field of connection that happens when we all get to share a story together, when we all get to come into living in a story together, and we get to be in it in our own temple, right? In the temple of our consciousness. And so we can actually explore who and what we are in the privacy of our own homes, of our brains, while also having this shared experience. And it's like it's I mean, we could go on and on and on for that. I'm not going to go too deep down, because that could be like another 3-hour thing, but I want to just pick up this one thread, which is, the portals, and that, right, stories are portals. And I think more and more, there's this idea of being in ceremony and ritual is becoming, it's it's so weird. It's broken out of its cage. I don't know. That's a very strange expression. So please pardon if that offends anybody, because I don't mean it to. But it is now coming into the mainstream. slowly but surely, this idea of what it is to be in ceremony and ritual. And more people are remembering or being given access to come back into relationship with plants as medicine, and plants medicine as a portal to the other worlds. And I think that's a wild, amazing thing of many different aspects. And all along the way, I have always experienced story as a portal to give us access, and that there are many ways to access the other worlds. And we actually have this tool that was built into our beingness and into our body that so many people don't know. And they don't know how to use it. They don't know how to open the lid and say, take me to universe 563 dot, 44, it's like, take me into the land of the earthworm, and show me, and it's like, I feel like that's what stories are constantly doing. It's like they're bringing us into this, take me to the ancestors, bring me into the lap of joy and let her sing me to sleep tonight. Give me that lullaby, and there's so many different places that we can go to, and we experience the frequency, the energies, the synergies of these places when we allow those stories to come into the tool of our body. It's wild, beautiful, profound, big. It's like bigger than we can even imagine, and it blows my mind that it's like humans have been given this extraordinary tool, and so many people's imaginations are shut down so early in life, or their creativity is shut down so early in life, where they're told it's not supposed to be a certain way, rather than being given access to really learn about how their unique tool works. Because some of us are hammers, and some of us are screwdrivers, and some of us are knives, and some of us are feathers. And I feel like that's so much of the play that happens in these classes. When we step into these creativity classes, you get to if you haven't gotten to touch into what is your unique tool and how does it work, it's a beautiful place for it to happen.
Yeah, we're not taught those cues to find those threshold places in ourselves of, I'll just use the word listening in a bigger way, or being able to develop that witness consciousness to be able to even determine the meta narrative. One of the things that I often find in teaching is that people aren't taught, they just don't know how to do reflective skills. And I know this is something I've spent a lifetime trying to learn, to hone in myself. I'll hear a literal, oh, this happened, I saw a unicorn in the meditation, and it did this and this. And it was like, well, how did it make you feel? Oh, I don't know. How does that relate to your life? Oh, I don't know. The unicorn. There's this something that I feel is really needs to come into our education systems and our learning. Like you're saying, Leah, that imagination has been put, it was sort of trapped back into Pandora's box along with curiosity, which has got such a bad rap, that I really feel curiosity is one way of opening that imagination, wondering, and having words like "and" at the end of every sentence, and not accepting any answer as final. But it's like we've been sort of enculturated in a particular way. There's this great sort of Jungian philosophy that if you are taken over by a particular archetypal energy, maybe the archetype of the victim, or the critic, or the maybe some sort of archetype around power, and it's acting out in a very strong way where you're kind of possessed by it, their answer is to read more fairy tales, and to read more and more and more fairy tales, because they open us into an archetypal realm where a whole range of archetypes are normalized. And that as we touch each of these different archetypal frames of the witch, the child, the ingenue, the one who becomes queen after she's gone through all these trials, whatever it might be, or the archetype of talking mice, it gives us a range to draw upon, and it antidotes the one that we are trapped in. And it also, by connecting with a whole range of archetypal energies, it then opens us to like a a bigger range of expression in our being as well. And it's one of the reasons why I feel that as an antidote to that lack of, or the closing down of imagination, not the lack of imagination, because it's vast. I mean, we can't live in a universe that is so infinitely creative without having that in our being. But you know, how do we access that? And that question of how do we stop thinking like a human? How do we stop thinking in particular anthropocentric ways? And fairy tales are one way of spinning that on its head. One of the things I love about them is how enchantment and magic is just so, oh yeah, okay. And then she turned to the right and a raven said to her, and she goes, all right, and listened to the raven. It's also matter of fact. And the other thing that makes them, I guess, very specific is that they lack emotional, actually they just lack emotions, full stop. The mother then killed the child by chopping off his head and got the father to eat him. And then the daughter did this. And there's no, it's horrific, but there's no emotion for us to engage in. So by not hitting that emotional field in our being and then having a response to that, it enables us to access a sort of a different part in our being. Like you were talking before, Leah, about that deep sort of memory of fairy tales. They're in our bones because they've been spoken over thousands of years and spoken over so many tongues. So they're kind of been smoothed like river pebbles. There's a simplicity and a strength to a lot of the fairy tales that we know in our bones because we've heard them over thousands of years in whichever form. But with those bones, there's a deep knowing and a familiarity, and sometimes they just rise and in our being, or when we hear them spoken, they just open that door to when our ancestors spoke them, because those ancestors were the ones who were in touch with the earth in a way that a lot in our culture aren't. So it's like we kind of can access what they accessed because it's the same story. They open that doorway, that portal in our being. They open that portal to the other world. They open that portal to the underworld, and to be able to, through symbol and metaphor, read the signposts of soul and potential and possibility. And there's something as well about them. Actually, there's something else that's been really touching me. I'll be curious what you think about this. It's kind of a new sense. And I realized that stories have been of vast service to me in so many ways. They've guided me in some of my darkest places, and they've guided me because they give me a strong framework. They take me in deep and then bring me out. And I've always been immensely grateful to these old tales and how they've held me and stretched me. I didn't realize that we're also of service to the stories, of speaking them, that when they're spoken in the world, it keeps something rich alive. And when we speak them with our inflections, like our feminist inflections, we're not going to be speaking it in the way that Charles Perrault did. There's no way known I'm ever going to tell that repugnant story of Red Riding Hood. I'm going to be telling it in my way, and in the way that is relevant now. But what came to me is a sense that we're also stretching archetypes that have got narrow and tight. The archetypal energies related to scarcity and power and money and health and climate and ideas like queen or king that are small, that are monarchical. That when we tell these stories with our understanding now of coming into sacred union with the divine masculine and feminine in ourselves, we're stretching those archetypes in a bigger way so that they can land and create a bigger field, a bigger ripple in our collective, so that king and queen can exist as sacred masculine and feminine through the aegis of the story, that we're of service to those archetypes to help them come into their bigness and their fullness, that they can then walk the earth in that way, that we're allowing them to live in a greater richness, that we're not just perpetuating some of the skinniness of the archetypes that are ruling the world in ways that are destructive.
I love this whole line of thought that you're on, and this idea that, it's, I mean, it's like, how many stories do I call upon? I have a couple of stories that I keep in my back pocket that I know, that I call upon and really help me in moments of quandary, or just bring sheer delight, or get me out of this world and into another world. And it's like, yes. And then this idea of, right, and we actually are in service of stories. Like when we speak them, we give them life, we give them a way to continue living among us. And I always think of stories like trees. It's like, we want our trees to grow up. We don't want to be stuck in a forest of a bunch of little spindly things. We want them to grow deep roots, and we want them to get really tall and put out their arms and fruit and feed me in many, many different ways, and give me fruit that I can and share with others, and give me shade. And so stories, I really do believe, should be able to shift and transform and change. And I also think that it's like, especially with our personal stories, like we're not going to go there, because we're going to focus on this idea of changing and working with old stories. But I also feel like this idea of like working with old stories, like they're strong and powerful, especially if they've been told a certain way for a really long time. There's an energy in them. There's a power in them. And I've come to experience in a personal way where, like, when we start to change stories, that's kind of dangerous business. It's big business, in terms of, like, it's like, I kind of think about it like when we go up to an elder. If you go up to an elder and you're like, I don't like that hat, and by the way, that jacket is so outdated, I'm just going to rip it off of you, and they're going to punch you in the nose. And I feel like I've actually had that experience, where I've tried to play with old stories, and it's like, it's not my business to retell old stories. That's just not who I am as a storyteller. So I, like you, I think we're very akin this way, where it's like, I want to listen for, how does the story want to live and walk among us now? And I've learned so much about the humble nature of, well, you tell me who you are. Why don't I not put my feminist projections on Sleeping Beauty and tell you how I think you should be in the world? And like, why don't I tap into that portal that you're speaking about and be like, okay, Sleeping Beauty, how are you walking in the world now? Who have you become? Who are you becoming? How can you be seen in this place? What are your superpowers in this place? You tell me who you are, and I will give you voice.
The reciprocal way. It's a dance of engagement and not imposing our interpretations, but it's a respect of the story as this living. I kind of think of them like living animals, that they have life force, and they have such wisdom. I think
it's really meaningful to take the time to understand what you're working with. I didn't realize this. I took on a really old story, the story of the witch. It's a very, very powerful story. It has a lot of energy and a lot of projections and a lot of stuff on it. And I had no idea what I was getting myself into. And it's like, it's like, I grew up in a time when, like, the whole witchy thing was a fairy tale and freakish and weird, and all of the ancient knowledge. I didn't know witches as being connected to very ancient ways of being, rooted to the land and millions of years of culture and all of that. I had no relationship to that. And so even when I was younger and starting out, beginning to learn about ritual and ceremony and something, it was all conceptual. It was distant. I didn't have any real grounded, rooted experience in this. So I had no idea how powerful those energies were until I came into direct face-to-face relationship with them. And that's when I began to learn, oh, wow, you got to learn about how to manage a field of energy. Oh, wow, you have to actually learn about energy projection. Oh, wow, you're going to learn about how to protect yourself from the projections of others. Oh, wow, you've got to really learn how to clear a space. Oh, wow, like this is all, this is the unspoken work of very skilled storytellers, that they're doing before, middle, and after, when they're conducting these fields of energy and inviting all these different beings into the room.
It's an invocation, one of these old stories. You're invoking those energies into the space, and you need to be accountable to the audience for that, and accountable to the story.
And I really appreciate what you're saying, accountable to the audience of that. It's like, in Welsh, the word for storyteller is guide. And to me, that means that they're going to take, like, a good storyteller is a guide that you can trust. Because any good storyteller might take you to the very crevices and darkest parts of humanity so that you can take a look. and learn from them. But a good storyteller will always bring you back home. They're not going to leave you out in the trenches. And I can't tell you how many movies or different things I've seen where I'm like, oh, that is not a trustworthy storyteller. You just want to take me and drop me off in the middle of hell and leave me there. No, thank you. I was like, I think I'll go watch something else and bring something else into my consciousness. I have one last question. And you said this very evocative term, or you were talking about, fairy tales as a way of as a tool for shamanic consciousness. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Like, what do you
Yeah.
mean by shamanic consciousness?
Fairy tales they root us in animism. They root us within nature. They open that doorway into a greater communion with the land. There's that part of us. They root us in the landscape of ourself and of where and how the story is being told. They root us in the landscape of the story and the beings that are being engaged in that. The symbols that are in a fairy tale, I feel they're like this radical path of this alchemizing radical path of initiation. Each of the symbols are so rich. The symbols of the spindle and the spinning and the golden apples, or the well where you're combing the dragon's hair. It's like, as you follow each of these, the big stories, they will lead you through a path of initiation, of going into into an understanding of there is a question or there's a calling. And they're very different than a typical hero journey story where the hero goes out and does what he needs to do and then comes back with all of that stuff. In a lot of the fairy tales, they were told by women and for women in the spinning rooms. And I've been really researching spinning and spindles and distaffs for a while. And if you think, in order to make 5 meters of cloth, of woven cloth, it's 15 kilometers of thread that you have been doing this with, and gathering bits of the wool, combing it out and twisting it together and spinning it on a distaff. So I'm thinking, my goodness, no wonder women were always holding the spindles. So there's apart from that, but that's sort of where the stories were told. You want to be sharing stories at those times. They're teaching places, the weaving rooms, the spinning rooms. So these stories are their medicine, their wisdom tales, their teaching tales, and they take you into the mythic realm. They take you into the anima mundi, the soul of the world, if you follow the symbolic guideposts. And one of the things I've discovered is that once you say yes to a story, either you've heard it and something has resonated through your being, then it will keep working you, and it will affect everyone around you. And I'm just thinking of the conversations that Leah and I have had when I was running Tangled Wood or Wolf Song or the Goddess Chronicles, through what happened to your website and to your staff and the
I'll
conversations and
never
what
let
would work
Tangled
and what
into our sphere ever again.
a name is so important. There's an aliveness, and it ripples out and it impacts you. It's like there's this great French word that I love, jadoub, and it's a chess word. And what it means is, when you are looking at your chessboard and you realize that one of the pieces is off center, it's off skew somehow, and you touch it and say jadoub, and you bring it to its rightful place. It means I touch, I adjust. And there's something that happens when you say yes to a story, or sometimes you realize you're being carried by a story. And jadoub, it touches and adjusts you, it tweaks you in some way. And it starts you on a path of asking questions that you might never have asked before. And coming back to what was happening, we were talking about at the beginning, and you were talking so eloquently about answers. And one of the things that came up for me when I was being carried by Red Riding Hood was the message that I received, I was asking a question, one of those meaningful ones that will change my life kind of questions. And the response from that old crone, that old grandmother, that grandmother wolf that's in there was, well, what kind of answer do you want, dear? There's answers are a dime a dozen. I could give you any answer, but could you trust it? Your question is actually too small. Can you ask a bigger question? And it got me thinking about this, the space that I'm in when I ask a question, and what happens if I turn the kaleidoscope to another view. The question itself becomes really different, and that the question shapes the answer. And I realized that Grandmother Wolf was right, that my questions were way too small, which meant that my dreams were too small, which meant that my blinkers were narrow. There's a way that when you engage with a fairy tale, that it involves your whole world, that there's signs and symbols that come out at you, that wolf cloud that is barking at the moon that teaches you then to go, I don't know, whatever it might be that it means for you. It teaches you to speak poetic. It carries you, it reflects things up to you that you might never want to know about yourself. With the story that I loathe of Red Riding Hood around the grim version where the woodcutter comes in and saves Red Riding Hood, she's so done passive. I was going through a period of strong grief a few years ago, and I realized I kept thinking about Red Riding Hood, and I hated it because she's passive. She's a stinking victim. She's hideous. And I hated the idea that some man comes in and rescues her from the wolf and chops open the wolf. And it's like, I don't want this. I do not want this story. And I realized, oh my goodness, how many ways in my own self that I was reflecting this passive, nice girl child, this good girl archetype that I was carrying in myself and externalizing. And I found an older story then of Red Riding Hood, or it found me, and it is pure shamanic. Grandmother invites the wolf in. She allows herself, she says, basically it's time for me to be eaten. Devour me, forest, devour me, wolf, eat me. And the wolf leaves part of grandmother's thigh and her blood on the table there. And Red Riding Hood comes in, and the wolf says, here, have some wine, have some meat. Very Eucharistic. And she does. She imbibes grandmother. I mean, these stories are about thresholds and initiations. What does it mean to eat the old woman, to eat the Kaliak? There's something that is primal and barbaric and rich in these stories that to me says, if you're eating grandmother, you are in a shamanic underworld story. They're not nice, they're loving and they're compassionate, but they're not sentimental. And they lead you on that path in that way.
Oh my gosh.
They change you.
They aren't nice.
Yeah.
And they're not easy. And I feel like these old stories have something that has been scoured and removed from so many of our modern expression of story, which is the presence of mystery.
Yes.
And when so many of our stories lack mystery, it's like we learn how to live in the world through story. And these old stories, like mystery is what is at the table. You know, mystery is part of the story, and it teaches people how to live with mystery in their lives, that it's nothing to be banished or feared, but it's a part of life. And I feel like because in so much of our modern day Hollywood storytelling, there is no mystery. And now when we're in times like we're in right now, which by the way has got a lot of mystery in it, what's going to happen next in our world, global politics, you know, we have we don't have as many skills to live well in these times, to live confidently in these times. We're nearly at the end of our time to speak today. I hate being in relationship to time because story brings us out of time. But I do want to presence that there's going to be a way for people to spend time with you very soon, which is this Sunday. You start a storytelling series called Stories from the Hearth. Do you want to tell us just a little bit about that and what people will be experiencing in it?
Oh, this is going to be delicious. This program, I'm really excited about it. And just a little thread from what you were saying and going on with carrying on with mystery and answers, I think what these tales do is that they teach us to ask more and more questions and not to seek an answer, but just to seek even bigger and richer questions. And these 4 stories, there's a story each week leading us up to winter or summer solstice, depending what hemisphere you're in, and that they follow a thread around what is soul asking of me at this time. What is my relational experience with my heart, with beloved, with divine, and with the earth? How do we explore and discover some of the signposts that for me to read at this time, and how might I explore the metaphors of that? So we'll be marrying the bear in the Valamon story and looking at what our heart's yearning might be. What is the golden wreath that we seek that can only be found in the wild, that can only be found if we climb onto the bear's back? And what does it mean in our life at this time to go into the forest, to go into the unknown, to go into mystery and ride the bear's back and to hang on and to find love in there? And how does that relate to our day-to-day life? How does that relate to our experience of the collective? And the questions that we're navigating of how to marry opposites, how to find a way of sitting with grief and igniting hope. How do we sit with that in ourselves for it to land and be of value in the world?
I
So
love
for marrying the bear, yeah, sorry, yeah.
I love the class, and the thing that I really love about it is that you will be working with 4 different stories.
Yes.
We meet on Sundays from 3 to 5:30. That's Pacific Standard Time.
Thank you for the practical details. I
Yes,
can get
yes,
really
yes.
carried in the
Carried away.
imagination
I'm going
of
to
it.
give people the
Okay.
just kind of the information to get them to the door.
Yes.
There'll be links to find this course, but also if you go to School for Sacred Storytelling.com, are we .com? We are School for Sacred Storytelling.com. Then and we'll have links, all below. You can also find the link, and it begins this Sunday, and it's just going to be there's story like. Winter is made for stories. It's a time when, well, you're in the summertime over there, but it was over on the side of the world, we're in winter. And so, but it's the time to go inward, and it's a beautiful time to explore these stories. And Jacqueline, what a gift it's been to be with you.
It's been a pleasure, and to explore stories in a ceremonial way through simple ritual and through writing and through listening and teasing out threads in all sorts of experience. I like these programs to be very, very experiential.
You really
It's
get to know
a
yourself
treat.
through the journey of getting to know these stories.
Yes.
I love that. I love that. Oh, I just love you so much.
Oh, likewise, Leah. I'd love to these conversations. Yes, they're
Fun, so fun. And
important.
I get to see how people come out of Jacqueline's classes, and they're always glowing and filled with delight, and they walk a little bit softer in the world. And I just have noticed that people just really cherish your class and the space that you create. So if you're looking for a beautiful place to get to know yourself, to really come into this relationship with old stories, and to have more tools to maneuver these times, I really feel like that's what we're doing here. And we're one of the things. We're also having a lot of fun. We're having a lot of fun with great people. So
Yes.
that is that. So I'll put the links down. And the other thing I'm just going to mention is that later in December, I'm going to be offering I'm still figuring out if it's going to be a 2-day or 3-day, but it's going to be a live stream training all about working with stories, a tool for healing. And again, we're looking at how do you work with stories, a tool to navigate challenging times. And so I'll be putting out links for that soon. But this starts this Sunday, and I'm so excited for it. And anything else that you want to say before we sign off, Jacqueline?
Actually, a quote's coming to me from John O'Donohue.
Mm.
And I think this is the inspiration that comes from stories. And he says, I would love to live like the river flows, carried by the surprise of my own unfolding. I'd love to live as the river flows, carried by the surprise of my own unfolding. They teach us to come into wonder, in the wonder of ourself and the wonder of the world. Thank you, Leah. This has It's been lovely to connect with you and to all of you here as well today.
And thank you for that, Jacqueline. What a gorgeous way to end. And you just said all of you. And it's true, people who are members of Patreon and Substack, Mighty Networks, they all get invitations to come live. And they were invited to ask questions, but nobody had any questions today. So we didn't have those to bring. But I just love getting to share this with everybody. Actually, it's really delightful. And so sending you out the door with beauty and grace and ease, and may good stories find you. So it is. Bye, everybody.
Bye.